Well, when Labor came to power in 2007, it abolished the coalition's Pacific solution with disastrous consequences. During the 5 years of the Rudd-Gillard government, God, remember that, there was an influx of nearly 50,000 asylum seekers. People smugglers were rubbing their hands with glee. Never let it be said that Labor is bad for business, certainly not people smuggling business.
Then, when the coalition returned to power, it introduced Operation Sovereign Borders and stopped the unauthorised arrivals by turning the boats around, something Labor said was impossible. Having at last realised that most Australians don't want people smugglers to run our immigration system, Labor would have you believe it is now strong on borders.
But the party headed by Each Way Albo can't help itself. As I revealed in the Daily Telegraph last week, Labour's spokesperson for Home Affairs, Kristina Keneally, has been saying one thing to the public and another to the refugee activists. And when this story was put to her, Keneally at first didn't deny it outright.
Labor for Refugees, this is a story in the Daily Telegraph today, last year said in a document, quote, after Labor wins the election and Labor's refugee policy have resulted in positive outcomes, Kristina Keneally would welcome an approach by L4R to end offshore processing. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know what they have said, but I can tell you what our policy is. And our policy is we support Operation Sovereign Borders.
So Labor for Refugees have their wires crossed, it would seem here.
I don't know what they've said. I haven't seen the document.
You mentioned, Ms Keneally, that you want to be Home Affairs Minister if Labor wins government. On that issue, why then did you tell Labor for Refugees at the 2021 conference that you would welcome an approach by that group, Labor for Refugees, to end the offshore processing regime if Labor wins government?
Well, I haven't seen that information that you're sharing there with me, and I said this morning on Sky News, but let me be clear. Our policy is Operation Sovereign Borders. Regional resettlement, boat turnbacks were safe to do so, and offshore processing. And let me... No, I did not.
So why are they saying you did?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
What is going on?
Let me be clear. When KK says, let me be clear, you know you're in for a world of pain. Here we go again. Pandering to refugee activists and inner city sentiment. If that wasn't obvious enough, earlier this month.
If people smugglers seek to take advantage of an incoming Labor government and do send more boats, will you be tough on boat turnbacks and will you consider an offshore resettlement deal?
We'll turn boats back. Turning boats back means that you don't need offshore detention.
The leader's office has clarified his statement, saying the party has no plans to walk away from the policy.
It's not a question of if Labor will end offshore detention, it's a question of when. Take, for example, Labor's policy on temporary protection visas.
Our policy is to end TPVs because it is a costly, unnecessary bureaucratic process for no good outcome.
Yes, how appalling, how cruel that we require asylum seekers to fill out forms and justify why they should be allowed to remain in Australia. Oh, the humanity. Now, don't forget, Ms Keneally was Labor's loudest supporter on independent Karen Phelps's so-called medevac bill, which allowed, remember this one, activist doctors to circumvent government and transfer offshore asylum seekers to the mainland.
It is why medevac was needed and required, to ensure people who are sick receive the medical attention they require. These decisions should never have been left in the hands of people without any medical training, let alone concentrated in them. Labor strongly supports medevac. Medevac is working as intended. These laws should not be repealed.
Medevac is working as intended, she said.
An asylum seeker who botched a DIY penis enlargement by injecting himself with palm oil has been transferred to Australia under controversial medevac laws for reconstructive surgery.
He should have used coconut oil, obviously. Labor does not want to talk in depth about its border protection policies because if it does, they will be exposed for what they are. Watch Keneally's reaction when she was pressed on this by Sky's Laura Jays this week.
Well, there are circumstances in if a boat cannot be turned back, if it's been sabotaged, if some of the occupants of the boat end up in the water and they need to be taken aboard an Operation Sovereign Borders vessel. The question is,
They will be
what
taken
happens?
to Nauru.
They will be taken directly to Nauru.
They will be taken to Nauru.
That is not something
They will be taken to Nauru.
is that something that has directly happened under this government? Usually they're taken ashore to processing and then taken. Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a gap here.
Laura, there is no gap here.
Laura, they will be taken to Nauru. I mean, are they seriously, Australia, you're thinking of putting that person in government? You've got to be joking. I don't mean to be facetious, but I think we saw the real Kristina Keneally there. Speaking of the real Kristina Keneally, does she know she has a doppelganger out there?
And make no mistake, if you attempt to come to Australia by boat, you will not make it. You will be turned back or you will be sent to Nauru.
The Labor Party have ceded the ground on asylum seekers and this debate to the Conservatives for far too long. We've allowed the debate to be held on they will determine who comes to this country and the manner in which they come, and we'll stop the boats. I believe Australia is big enough, culturally, economically, socially, geographically, to be able to efficiently process these applications and to welcome these people into our country.